If We Listen Well by Edward Guinan. For too long we have considered peace as the absence of conflict. We have approached the issue with this limited perspective and have directed our attention to the prevailing conflict of the moment, attempting to discover ways of reducing the destructiveness of the event. This approach is both necessary and desirable, but insufficient as we continue to approach the problem in fragmented and isolated ways. We continue to deal in symptomatic terms as if war and destruction and violence are the extensions and natural outgrowths of malignant attitudes, values, relationships, and beliefs that we continue to embrace. A few thoughts on peace. Conflict will always be an integral part of human life, but our methods of dealing with it need to change. We must be willing to develop an ongoing critical view of our values, operating premises and relationships, and a sensitivity to those around us. Peace demands that one anticipate the effects of his views and actions on others, and the unifying or destructive effects that they may have. Most importantly, one comes to realize that the end does not justify the means. We get what we do, not what we hope for or intend. You cannot improve a man through punishment, nor can you bring peace through war or brotherhood through brutalization. Finally, one comes to appreciate the reality that there can be not we's and they's in our lives, but only brothers and sisters, all children of God, all sacred and dignified. Destruction of any one of these God gifts means a certain destruction of oneself, and a mystery that is gone forever from this small, fragile world. Violence. Violence can be seen as destructive communication. Any adequate definition must include physical, verbal, symbolic, psychological, and spiritual displays of hostility and hatred. The definition must include both our acts and our inactions, and that which is done directly to people or indirectly to them through what they esteem. Many forms will take on a combination of these characteristics. Violence should then include physical acts against another, the range of acts from personal attack to war which violates human autonomy and integrity, verbal attacks that demean and humiliate, symbolic acts that evoke fear and hostility, psychological attitudes that deny one's humanity and equality, spiritual postures that communicate racism, inferiority, and worthlessness. Violence then becomes a dynamic rather than merely one act. Hunger, poverty, squalor, privilege, powerlessness, riches, despair, and vicarious living are all forms of violence, forms that a society approves of and perpetrates. We have been willing to discuss violence in terms of ghetto uprisings, student unrest, street thievery, and trashing, and we have been unwilling to direct our attention to the more pathological types of violence that are acceptable, the types that daily crush the humanity and the life of untold millions of brothers and sisters. In the 60s, we spoke with alarm of the increase of violence in our society, which may have been a half-truth. Violence became more democratic in the decade of the 60s. Instead of resting exclusively with those who construct and maintain ghettos, keep food from the mouths of children, and coerce the young through educational programming into war, violence instead became the tool of a widely divergent group seeking equality, power, and redress. Under the umbrella of violence, there reside two distinctively different phenomena. First, there is the violence of men and women who act out of frustration, hopelessness, and anger in an attempt to grasp at life. The act of the slave breaking the chains, which is understandable and inevitable as long as some humans are in bondage. The other type of violence is the violence of the respectable, the violence of the powerful that seeks personal gain and privilege by maintaining inhuman conditions. It is the violence of the boardrooms, legislators, and jurists, the white-collar violence that puts surplus milk down sewers, robs workers of their wages, maintains prisons of infamy, the type that lies to children, discards the weak and old, and insists that some should half live while others rape and ravage the earth. This latter type of violence is what we must become aware of and actively dismantle if the future is to hold any possibilities for peace, in a world where men and women have a right to live and develop and participate by reason of their humanity, not by reason of their class. Nonviolence. Nonviolence cannot then be understood as passivity or indifference to the dynamic of life. It is not the posture of removing oneself from the conflict that marks the truly nonviolent person, but quite on the contrary, it is placing oneself at the heart of that dynamic. Nonviolence means taking the responsibility for aiding the direction of human communication and brotherhood. Nonviolence means an active opposition to those acts and attitudes that demean and brutalize another. And it means an active support of those values and expressions that foster human solidarity. Nonviolence, in essence, means taking a stand in favor of life and refusing to delegate individual moral responsibility to another person or group. It means taking control of one's life and aiding others in doing likewise. Nonviolence is an attempt to find truth and love, even in the midst of hatred, destruction, and pride. As the means cannot be separated from the desired ends, nonviolence cannot be separated from peace, for it is the value system and dynamic that makes peace possible. The times. The past has not been given to us. It is not ours to breathe or exhale. We live within the smallest perimeter, which we call today. And into this brief moment, into this small space, we beckon and command the future. These are not good times, but good times do not mold great people. The sins of our excesses and arrogance can destroy us, or these failings can humble us to sainthood. Such are the times. If the great virtues and teachings of the martyrs, resistors, and saints are relegated to a utopian or future-oriented condition, then indeed they have little value for us at all. But the great heritage that this community of liberation has left us is not in some unreal or impossible dream. It is this: love can and must be lived today, despite the pain and difficulty of such a life. Tomorrow will carry the tenderness and peace which we live now. Do not compromise today. Dear brothers and sisters, it is all that we have. This assembled community of peacemakers has paid dearly for their belief in such words, and their lives form a chronicle of inspiration. They have been demeaned and laughed at. They have been dragged through jails and courtrooms and prisons. A few have even paid the price of peace with their lives. The first signs of a violent society appear in its basic inability to communicate. Words lose their meaning and become hollow. They are twisted and deformed as tools of manipulation and servitude. Noble words such as truth, goodness, and love may come to mean despotism, obedience, and death. Peace becomes another name for multi-headed war missiles, and nonviolence is wrenched to mean silence or lack of opposition to thievery, privilege, and the status quo. Now a few words about the spiritual. A line from a contemporary song pleads, "Help me make it through the night." We find our existence framed in terms of aloneness rather than solidarity, struggle rather than consummations, and departures rather than arrivals, questions rather than answers, and most importantly, we find our existence framed in terms of night rather than daylight. We cry out for fear the night will absorb us, yet we are unsure of any presence. We sing so as not to be crushed, yet the tones reflect the endless chant of the nightingales. We dance so as not to fall prey to these awesome interludes of emptiness. And most of all, we pray so as not to lie. And these are the words we may use. Help us make it through the night. Yet in the aloneness and struggle, in the departures and questions, in the cries and songs, dances and prayers, there are imprints of heroic men and women. There are weavings of beauty. There are caresses of God. Traced through the faces of the old are messages of dignity and tenderness. The wail of the newborn is proof of silent breaths conspiring together. Each "forgive me" and "I love you" is prefaced by the warm tides of grace. Saints are born in Harlem in precise rhythm. Young people hurdle concrete mazes to touch and remember. Children weep for lost birds. Monks and mystics pray the sun up in the morning and call the evening dew. There are still wonderment, wishes, and dreams. You must never forget that you are the brother or the sister of a carpenter and the child of a king. You must remember that all life is unfulfilled without you. You must learn that life is mysterious and sacred, and that you must never, never destroy it. And if you listen well, you will hear the chanting of others, and they are singing to you. They are singing, "Help us make it through the night."